Okay, welcome back. Hope you're suitably refreshed. What we're going to be looking at in the second half is we'll be focusing more particularly on diet and the physical changes that diet can produce. We'll also be looking at some other evidences for evolution that tend to be put out there in the media as scientific fact, and we'll be examining those to find out if that is indeed the case. And then we'll have a look at I found some quite interesting quotes from evolutionists themselves while I was doing my research for this. So we'll be closing with some of those and making our conclusions. But at the end of the session, it's up to you to decide who you want to believe. And I know what I've decided. I know what probably most of you have decided, but you can examine the evidence, take some food for thought away from you. There's some fact sheets here, for example. There's also evaluation sheets that can tell us what you thought as well. And we'll wrap it up, and then if you'd like to see more of these in the future, let us know as well. I've got some ideas for a future session, so I'll be sharing that a little bit with you at the end as an appetite whetter. Right. Okay, so let's have a look at lions. Now, surely the lion is a great killer, and he's designed particularly to kill. Of course he is. This is what science will tell us. But did you know that lions, many of them, have been raised vegetarians in zoos, and when they are raised vegetarians, they are highly docile in nature, and more so than that, not only are they highly docile, but they live longer and have less health problems than when they are carnivores. And vets, for example, will tell you not to feed your cat milk because it can cause kidney failure. When a pride of lions catches an antelope, the numero uno lion, the head of the pride, gets to eat first. And what he does is, he rips open the antelope, goes into the content of the stomach, eats the content of the rumen in the stomach, and he gets all those plant vitamins into him first, and then he is the strongest. So he eats the other things as well, and the rest of the lions get to eat everything else. But because he's eating those plant vitamins, he's actually slightly stronger than all the others, and that keeps him at number one in the pride. So that's a pretty interesting set of facts. Here are a tiger's teeth. Now then, these teeth here, they kind of act like shears, and scientists will say that is perfect for cutting meat. Absolutely perfect. We touched on this in the dinosaur session when we talked about the T-Rex's teeth. But such cutting is also perfect for cutting tough plant material. They don't tell you that. So just because it's used for what it's used today doesn't mean to say it was always used for that necessarily in the past. Right, and here we have a lovely pair of wolves. And from the wolf, all these breeds of dog came. So when Darwin talked about the finches and all those different types of finches coming from probably one pair, he's probably right. And all the genes for all these different kinds of dogs were contained within those wolves. But we know that that's not evolution. We know that they were interbred, just like those foxes were interbred to achieve certain sizes and shapes. So if that's not evolution, why does it necessarily follow that the finches were evolution? Dr. Walter Weiss said he said he had a dog and it was being fed on meat all the time. And it got to the point where the dog's health was beginning to decline. So he thought, what would happen if I swapped it over to a vegetarian diet? And coincidentally, when I was growing up, we had a dog as well. And he got to the stage where he wasn't quite, what he used to be. He didn't have quite the same energy. So the vet suggested we put him on a vegetarian diet. He was about 7 years old then. And then the dog ended up lived to be 14 in the end, which isn't a bad age. He was only a little smooth-haired fox terrier. But what have we found this as well? And the healthful period of the animal was extended by 2 or 3 years as a result of that. Now, isn't it interesting? The further the animal goes away from the original diet, because these are scavengers, these hyenas, the uglier. Also think about the way a vulture looks as well, scavengers. Alright, so they're trying to survive on whatever they can, and they tend to get further and further and uglier away. But I mean, at least you can still laugh about it. But the thing is, Walter Weiss said he did a study of these kinds of creatures out in the wild, and he also noticed that even creatures that were smaller than the hyena had a higher rank in the pecking order overall. So the further from the original they get, the uglier they get, and also they head down the pecking order in terms of the species out in the wild as well. Now then, look at these magnificent birds of prey and these incredibly sharp beaks. Now surely these beaks were designed for killing. Okay, and there's a vulture for you there. But look at these beaks on these animals, all birds of prey, and the talons that they have and the claws that they have. They must be designed for ripping other creatures apart, and that's why they're there. Well, this is a key parrot. And if we look at the key parrot, incredibly sharp beak, you see a little bit of its claws there. And these key parrots, they live in New Zealand. But what is their diet? Plants. They actually take the root of a particular tree, use that beak to dig up that root, and then use the beak to cut that root into pieces so they can use that for its diet. And then one year, they were building housing complexes in New Zealand, so they ripped the trees out in order to make way for these houses. So what did the key parrot do? Its diet had gone. Did it die out? No. Changed its lifestyle. What do you think it ate? Sheep. It climbed onto the backs of sheep, fed its way in through the back, and then fed on the fat around the kidney. And these sheep were lying dead all over the place. And one thing that will get a New Zealander angry is if you kill their sheep, because they are one of the biggest meat-eating nations in the world. Don't mess with their meat. Alright, so they then quickly realised, well, we better plant these trees again. So they planted the trees again, and guess what the parrot did? It wasn't interested in the sheep anymore. It went back to eating the plants. Its preferred diet was the plants. But if that diet is taken away, either it dies or it adapts. That's the only choices it's got. A parrot. These have amazingly sharp and strong beaks as well. Capable, according to Walter Weiss, capable of between 5 and 10 tons of pressure. If you stick your finger in that parrot cage, if I did that, I'd never play the guitar again. My wife would probably celebrate. Peace at last. But that's the whole point. These having the equipment to kill doesn't necessarily mean you kill, because what does it use that beak for? Cracking nuts. That's what it uses the beak for. And somebody put a handbag down here to entice this parrot, and he stuck his foot through to grab hold of that handbag. So, you know, he's got the equipment there for grabbing hold of prey. He's got the beak to be ripping animals apart. We've already seen it with a key parrot, but all they eat is nuts. Right, now this is an interesting one. About 15 years ago, actually, I did a year's work at a garden centre as an assistant manager in the aquatics side. And we used to sell piranhas, and I used to quite look forward to piranha feeding time. Because you'd have these freeze-dried fish, basically, you used to feed them, and then you put it in and they would rip these things to shreds. And this is a very close relative called the pacu. You can see his teeth, they're not quite as sharp, but some species of pacu have sharper teeth than that, more like the piranhas. What does the pacu eat? Seeds. Okay, it eats seeds that fall into the water, and that's his diet. And piranhas have also been known to eat the seeds as well. So again, maybe in the past, more variety of plants, more variety of seeds. Maybe the piranha didn't need to eat anything other than that, but its diet was taken away because the ground was cursed and it didn't yield what it used to in the past. So then it decides to change its lifestyle, and in this case, it decided to become a killer. Right, and then you have these ground squirrels, fox squirrels, and chipmunks, and these eat seeds and plants. But sometimes, when acid rain kills off their forest, they will go and eat roadkills as a way of surviving. So they will actually go and eat dead animals rather than die. This is what animals do. And bats is one. They're insectivores, but some, classed as insectivores, but some eat nothing other than fruit as well, so that doesn't necessarily follow either. And then you have herbivores. Right now, most people would say, well, this is obviously designed just to eat plants. There's no canines, you haven't any teeth there at all at the front for a start. You've just got these teeth there, perfect crushing plant materials. So these are indeed herbivores and they will eat nothing else. Will an antelope go and eat something else if it needs to? The answer is yes. In very dry conditions, in deserts for example, such as the Nano, and calcium levels change, antelopes will actually go and gnaw carcasses in order to get the calcium that they need from the carcass instead. So even they can change their lifestyle and become carnivorous if they absolutely need to. Right, yeah, I used to keep rabbits. Anybody keep rabbits and guinea pigs in the past? Yeah, a few people have. And this was quite a few years ago as well. And I noticed, interestingly, sometimes that's strange, they eat their own droppings. Disgusting. I thought that was odd, and most rodents do that. And that's called, if they do that, they're called coprophages. But it basically means now, with the food that they eat, if it's not yielding what it used to, they have to pass it through the system twice in order to get what they need from it. So the fermentation that takes place in the cecum is no longer adequate as it goes through once. So they will pass it through the system a second time, and that's why they become coprophages. Right, now this is particularly interesting. Now Walter Weiss suggested a lot of these ideas about animals being able to adapt, and having the equipment to kill doesn't necessarily mean they're killers. They can adapt from one to the other. But a scientist came along and said, right, now, Weiss, you've lost your marbles. Because something like a lion is not just different because of its teeth and its claws, it's actually different because of its gut as well. You see, a carnivore has a shorter gut length, about 6 times the trunk length. The trunk length is the length of the torso, by the way, so about 6 times the trunk length, because it needs less absorptive sites within its gut in order to get the nutrients that it needs from what it eats. Humans, 15 times the trunk length. Herbivores, like an antelope, 22 times the trunk length, or a cow, 22 times the trunk length. So the scientists said, look, how are you going to get from a 6 times gut length to a 22 times gut length without millions of years of evolution? It's just impossible. So Walter Weiss decided to do a little experiment to see if indeed it took that amount of time. And he wanted to experiment with diets to see if diet would affect the gut length. And he also wanted to see if just changing the bacteria in the gut would affect the gut length as well. So luckily, he had a PhD student who was one of his students at the time who was doing some work on diets with broiler chickens. And he put together 4 different diets, and he said, I want you to feed these chickens on this diet for 6 weeks, then I want you to measure the gut lengths of all the chickens on these various diets. So he had 4 different diets. One, purely plant material. The second one, diet B, was plant material plus antibiotics. The third one, diet C, was animal protein, or animal diet. And the fourth one, diet D, was animal diet plus antibiotics. So they were to be fed on those 4 different diets, and then they were going to measure the gut length. Now then, here's the results. Here we are. So, diet A, plant protein diet. Incidentally, the diets didn't make any difference to carcass mass. They grew to about the same level, by the way. That's the first point. But plant protein diet, result, that was the longest gut. More space was needed to absorb the food, so the gut was longer. Diet B, plant protein plus antibiotics. Result, shorter gut. Bacteria decreased the gut length. So a change in the bacteria decreased the gut length. Diet C, animal protein diet. Result, still shorter. So less space needed to absorb the nutrients in the food, so the gut was shorter. And diet D, plant protein diet plus antibiotics, that was the shortest gut length. Bacteria decreased the gut length as well. So plant proteins are good for you, they're good for your development of the gut. Antibiotics are bad for you. All right, and Walter Weiss was saying, basically, only use antibiotics when you need to, only use them when you're sick, very sick, and avoidance would be the best. He also noted with the chickens that were eating, having the antibiotics, that heart mass was larger, so the heart was affected badly. Without antibiotics, the heart was smaller and stronger, and also the fact that the liver mass was also bloated as well as a result of antibiotics. And he suggests that maybe the fact that we've got increased heart problems amongst the young these days could be due to the increase in the use of antibiotics. So, did it take millions of years to get from the one that lens to the other? No, 6 weeks, that's all it took. Sorry, evolutionists. Right, now then, on we go. This is what we call an omnivore skull. So, these sites will tell us have teeth that are designed for eating plants and for eating meat as well. So you've got your canines and you've got your molars, but you see the molars are smaller and the premolars are smaller as well. So omnivore was to say have teeth structures that can be used to eat either. Now look at this guy. Boy, does he have canines. Never seen anything like it. Saber-toothed tiger maybe. What does he eat? Plants. Nothing else. So that doesn't necessarily follow either. So what are those canines actually there for? Any ideas at all? What are they there for? I'll tell you what they're there for. They're there to attract the ladies. It's a secondary sex characteristic. Alright, just like we saw with some of the dinosaurs with the horns, and we also saw with the antlers on modern creatures as well, during the mating season. They're there to attract the ladies. And that's an important part of nature as well. Right, now this is another experiment that Walter White did, particularly fascinating as well. Now, sheep were developing skew legs, and the scientists were trying to work out why that was. And Walter White said they'd been stall-fed on plant proteins, and as a result they're losing calcium from their bones, and that's why they're developing these skew legs. And the scientists said, what a load of rubbish. And Walter White said, let's test it. So again, we put some diets together. Now then, bone formation. So these are a new generation now of sheep, and he's tested a new diet on them. Plant protein, if they were fed purely plant protein, they had healthy bone formation. If he added 3% animal protein, it was much worse. If he added 5% animal protein, it was still worse. If he added 8% animal protein, horrendous. Then he added 8% plant protein, perfect. Perfect bone formation. And the same works for cat, the same works for dog, the same works for lion. So what was the original intended diet for all these creatures? Plant protein. Scientific evidence that the Bible was right after all. Okay, now, science will say that we have evidence of evolution because of vestigial organs. Now there's an explanation here. It's a rudimentary structure in humans corresponding to a functional structure in ancestral animals. So basically they were saying that we have structures within us that we no longer use, and they're throwbacks to some evolutionary throwback further on down the line, basically. So we've evolved the use of those structures away. And they will say the appendix is one, and we have so-called gill slits in the embryos when we are developing in the womb. And the coccyx is one at the end of the spine, and there are membranes in the eyes. Did you know that the list of vestigial organs that was made by the German anatomist Wiederheim in 1895 included approximately 100 organs, including the appendix and the coccyx? As science progressed, it was discovered that all of the organs on Wiederheim's list had very important functions. Let's have a look at some examples. So the thymus, you see that just there, triggers the immune system in the body by activating the T cells. The pineal gland in the brain, you might remember I mentioned that in music lectures because the pineal gland was supposed to be also the third eye, the all-seeing eye. Do you remember that? If you look at the Egyptian all-seeing eye, it's meant to be based on that, the door through to the spiritual world. That's another story. The pineal gland, but it secretes melatonin, and is important for day and night cycles, very important for hormone control. The thyroid gland produces thyroxine. We know today without thyroxine we're in big trouble because it plays vital roles in digestion, heart and muscle function. The pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the body, was on there. And the semilunar fold in the eyes that they're talking about, they cleanse and lubricate the eyeball. Ignorance in those days was bliss, but they'll still put that forward as evidence today. S.R. Scadden made this interesting statement. He wrote, since it's not possible to unambiguously identify structures, and since the structure of the argument used is not scientifically valid, I conclude that vestigial organs provide no special evidence for the theory of evolution. And he said that in 1981, but they're still using it as an argument today. These so-called gill slits that appear during embryonic stages. The gills that supposedly appear in the early stage of human embryo are in fact the initial phases of the middle ear canal, the parathyroid that controls calcium in the body, by the way, and the thymus as well. So all these structures that we need, these all have a vital use. And they're not throwbacks to looking like fish. You see, they say, I'll come back to this in a minute, the different stages that we go through. Right, and then you had Haeckel coming along. And he came along a few years after Darwin had published his book. Darwin, in his book, he admitted that there wasn't a huge amount of evidence for his theory, including in the fossil record, and he said that he was hoping that the evidence would be found later on. So Haeckel thought, well, if I can come up with something, then I'm going to be famous, aren't I? And he certainly is. Right, he faked drawings of embryos. There they are. A fish, a salamander, a turtle, a chicken, a rabbit, and a human. And he said, look at the embryos of all these. Look how similar they are. That must mean we've all more or less, hi there, welcome. We all more or less come from the same thing. We're all throwbacks. We've all evolved from a similar state all the way through. These are the real embryos. And you can see that they look nothing like each other. So here's a little timeline for you. So 1859, out comes Darwin's book. He predicted evidence would be found to support his theory, and he appealed for it to happen as well. Then, about 10 years after that, Haeckel faked his drawings of embryos to use as evidence for evolution. And then about 6 years later, he was convicted of fraud by 6 professors of his own university for this. The gill slits idea was proven wrong, and he admitted during the trial for that as well, or the hearing, whatever they had, that he had drawn. He said, "Well, I drew them from memory." You see, right? And I forgot about the differences. But obviously they didn't let him off. But again, that's still being used as an argument. George Gaylord Simpson, one of the founders of neo-Darwinism, writes, Haeckel misstated the evolutionary principle involved. It is now firmly established that ontology does not repeat phylogeny. He said that in 1965. That's a long time afterwards for him to be saying that. So, I'm going to explain the different embryo stages. So they say, look, what happens is the embryos go through a fish stage, then it goes through a bird stage, then it goes through a monkey stage, and eventually you get to the human. But in actual fact, that's a load of nonsense. Because if evolution was really true, then once the fish stage had given rise to the next stage, the bird stage, the fish would have been gone. And then once the fish gave rise to the fish would have been gone. You can't change the gene and still have the original, so it doesn't work. In an article published in American Scientist, we read, surely the biogenetic law is as dead as a doornail. It was finally exercised from biology textbooks in the 50s. As a topic of serious theoretical inquiry, it was extinct in the 20s, but we still find it in the textbooks in our schools, in the science textbooks, to this very day. So they know that this stuff is wrong. It's been proved wrong, but they're still pushing it as if it's scientific fact. Homology. Scientists will tell you that we are related because of homology, and this is also proof of evolution. So this is the theory. Now, if you look at a human, a cat, a bat, a porpoise, you'll notice there are basically 5 digits in each one. So that shows that we are related. And then with the horse, it's meant to have evolved away 4 of the 5, and I was walking on 1 toe. This is the theory that you're supposed to believe. You might ask why the human, who is the most evolutionarily advanced creature, has a primitive hand in comparison to the horse, by the way. You know, that's a question that could well be asked. But William Fix, this is a great quote, William Fix, he says, this is in 1984, the older textbooks on evolution make much of the idea of homology, pointing out the obvious resemblances between the skeletons of the limbs of different animals. Thus, the pentadactyl, the 5-bone limb, pattern is found in the arm of a man, wing of a bird, the flip of a whale, and is held to indicate their common origin. Now, if these various structures were submitted by similar gene couples, varied from time to time by mutations, and acted upon by environmental selection, the theory would make good sense. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Homologous organs are now known to be produced by totally different gene complexes in the different species. The concept of homology in terms of similar genes handed on from a common ancestor has broken down. And he said that in 1984. Somebody gave me a pile of National Geographic magazines. Interestingly, magazines like Time magazine and Rumoured as well, National Geographic, are all run by Freemasonry. Isn't that interesting? But somebody gave me a pile of these, and they were all from 2012. And if I go back, that was in there as scientific fact. Proved wrong, well, at least in 1984, but it's still being pushed as scientific fact. Okay, so I'm going to sum up this section for you, then we're going to have a look at some quotes. I wanted to get this just right, so I actually typed it out. So, to sum up for you, I want to suggest the following. The world was perfect when it was created, and there was a food source for every single creature under the sun. Then, sin came in, things changed, food sources declined, and many creatures went extinct. Those that could adapt to something else did. Those that eventually had no other option but to survive in other creatures became the parasites. But that doesn't mean to say that they were designed to be the parasites in the first place. So with this new knowledge, now put yourself in Darwin's shoes. What would you say? I would say, whoa, one day the lion will eat just like the panda bear. His food source will be restored and he'll eat what he was designed to eat because it was there, it will be there again. One day we will see, one day all that we see today that reminds us of pain and suffering and all these things will be gone because the earth will be restored and it will be made new. Now how far-fetched is that after this seminar? You decide. But I see no scientific reason whatsoever to doubt that what God said was true. And unlike Darwin, who looked at the dark side and said, there is no love here, I can look at the dark side and say, things have changed because of sin, and to remind us of the fall of man, and to create a hope in us for a better world, so that we can look to God and ask God to cleanse us so that we can be part of that new creation. It's just a different outlook, using the same information, and the choice is yours. You can walk through the field and you can study the thorns and the thistles, or you can choose to study the rose. You look at the dark side, you can look at the light side. God has left enough there to remind us of the beauty of the past, but he's also permitted the negative to create in us the desire for something better. Choose. All right. Now, throughout the course of my research, I came across some interesting quotes. All of these quotes are not from Christians. Most of them are from university professors, most of them atheists, most of them evolutionists. Fascinating stuff. So, Professor Louis Bournois. Evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. Wow, that's interesting. I thought Genesis was supposed to be the fairy tale. This theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It is useless. Dr. T.N. Tamazin. Scientists who go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men. And the story they are telling may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact. There's another quote coming up, very interesting, related to that in a moment. Malcolm Muggeridge. I myself are convinced that the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it has been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future. Posterity will marvel that so flimsy and dubious an hypothesis could be accepted with the incredible credulity that it has. H.P. Lipson. If living matter is not then caused by the interplay of atoms, natural forces and radiation, how is it coming to being? I think, however, that we must admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation. I know this is an anathema to science, to physicists, as indeed it is to me, but we must not reject what we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Have we seen experimental evidence that supports a biblical paradigm today? Okay, and this one, I love this one. Dr. Colin Patterson, this guy's from the National History Museum in London. One of the reasons I started taking this anti-evolutionary view, well, let's call it non-evolutionary, was last year I had a sudden realization. One morning I woke up. It struck me that I had been working on this stuff for 20 years, and there was not one thing I knew about it. This was quite a shock that one could be misled for so long. I tried putting a simple question to various people and groups of people. Can you tell me anything you know about evolution? Any one thing that you know is true? I tried that question on the geology staff. The Field Museum of Natural History, and the only answer I got was silence. I tried it on the members of the Evolutionary Morphology Seminar in the University of Chicago, and all I got there was silence for a long time. And then eventually one person said, yes, I do know one thing. It ought not to be taught in high school. 1942, Nobel laureate Ernest Chain wrote, I have said for years that speculations about the origin of life lead to no useful purpose, as even the simplest living system is far too complex to be understood in terms of extremely primitive chemistry. Scientists have used in their attempts to explain the unexplainable that happened billions of years ago. God cannot be explained away by such naive thoughts. And August 1954, Dr. George Wald, another Nobel laureate, wrote in Scientific American, there are only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. A supernatural creative act of God. I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore I choose to believe that which I know is scientifically impossible. Spontaneous generation arising to evolution. Some people would rather believe the impossible than have to believe or admit that there might be a God. And lastly, the man himself, Charles Darwin, in a letter about 3 or 4 years before he died, to Charles Lyell, the guy who wrote Principles of Geology, whose book he took with him as a young man on that ship, the HMS Beagle. Often and often a cold shudder has run through me, and I've asked myself whether I may have devoted my life to a what? Fantasy. Not to a theory, not to something which might be plausible, might not, but to a fantasy. Okay, I wanted to say thank you very much for listening. There's a Bible verse I wanted to quote to you to finish. I wanted to give the last word to God himself. We need to understand, I'm sure most of you know this, but the creation story is not limited to Genesis. It's referred to back to in the Old Testament. It's referred back to in the New Testament. Jesus himself refers back to it. But in Colossians 1:16 it says, for him all things were created are in heaven and are on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or principles or powers, all things were created through him and for him. Praise God for that. Amen. Now then, hopefully that's given you a good informative other side so you can help you to make your minds up. Some of you may still have doubts. You might think, oh well, come on, what about the fact that the science has proved that the Earth is thousands of years old? What about the dating methods, dating systems? Well, my next talk, I will address that very issue. We'll be looking at the dating systems, the dating methods, and we'll be looking at what's accurate about them and what's maybe less accurate about them as well. So I'm only planning it at the moment. It's not finished. It's going to be a few weeks or possibly a few months off. But when that's ready, I'll be putting that on. Please don't miss it. Thank you so much for coming today. Be encouraged, people of God. The evidence is on our side. All right, the science, the real science, is on our side. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Amen.